Other than Jackie Chan?
The only one I can think of an Asian guy in a sort of romance kind of situation is Harold Kumar.
Wayne's World. Yeah, the girl's Korean, the rock star.
Well, maybe like some Asian films, but not American films.
They would have to have been indies, and I'm not familiar with them.
I like Godzilla.
I'm developing a television show. I'm the principal writer and producer, and as such, I'm casting. I'm responsible for making those key decisions. And I am being very conservative from a marketing point of view. Our main lead roles, our main protagonists are white.
I still get comments like, "You speak English very well."
The director tells me, "You need to be blacker."
We're all not like that. We don't have to have that accent. We don't have to, because I'm third generation. My Spanish is really bad.
With women from the Middle East, it's like the most offensive, the most painful stereotypes exist.
Women on the staff reportedly had to sign an agreement that they would not ever sue for, sexual harassment.
The writers were talking about their own sex lives. They were talking about the cast.
Renee Zellweger in Cold Mountain played a character that was actually a black slave in the novel, and they wanted to cast Renee, so they turned her into an Appalachian white woman.
Books that have been made into films where the character was gay, and in the film version, they're straight. And you're like, why?
Before I became old, I was cast as newscasters, as nurses, as attorneys. But recently, and I don't know why this is, they're bringing me in to speak with accents, to be like Cambodian maids or Korean madams. And I don't know why all of a sudden I'm not playing Americans anymore.
This is the Chronicle, April 23rd, 2008, and they're talking about this new film. Sony Pictures is putting out a new film called 21, and it's based on an MIT professor teaching his students to beat the odds in Las Vegas casinos. And they have this actor who I've never heard of. I'm sure he's a nice enough guy. I'm not trying to slam him. Jim Sturgis is the star student, Ben Campbell. The real life Campbell was an Asian American named Jeff Ma. What is the argument for having a story, a real story about an Asian student, suddenly played by a white guy when it's time to make the movie?
It was based on a best-selling book, Bringing Down the House, a true story where an MIT professor teaches a group of students how to win at blackjack at Vegas, this counting card system. And in reality, the MIT professor was Asian American, and most of the people on his team were Asian American. And the lead guy on that college team who won the most money was a Chinese American named Jeff Ma. And I guess he had a girlfriend who was white, who was played by Kate Bosworth in the movie. But in the movie, the professor is played by Kevin Spacey. The lead guy who wins all the money is played by a white British guy, Jim Sturgis, who had to have a dialect coach on the set to tell him how to speak like an American. I mean, talk about having to really go out of your way to have a white guy play an Asian American. I mean, to play an American. Just get an Asian American guy to play it.
I had a discussion a while back with a friend of mine, intelligent, white male, who was concerned that people were saying that a particular role, in this case it was in a play on Broadway, a particular role was being cast with a white male in it when the role was supposed to be an Asian male. And my friend was saying, well, he's the best actor for the role. Don't you want the best actor for the role? What does it matter? Why should, and I said, in this time, in this place, in this society, in this country, casting anybody other than an Asian male in that role is absolutely horrifying. It is unconscionable.
Second thing is not, the Jeff Ma documentary. It isn't. I mean, as exciting as my life has been, there's probably about 7 people that would have wanted to see the Jeff Ma documentary, probably everyone in my family, and that's it. So this is a mainstream movie. It's a movie that's supposed to just reach a lot of audiences, and that's just supposed to be, fun. And to that end, I think it was important for them to find the best actor, sort of regardless of race, regardless of height, regardless of anything like that, just to find the best actor.
I've talked to people who work in casting, and they will say, we can't find any talented Asian actors, or we can't find any Asian actors that have the training they need to play lead roles. But there's a circularity of the reasoning because the studios haven't created roles for Asian Americans, right? In fact, when there's an opportunity, as in 21, to cast Asian Americans in significant roles, they've refused to do that, and they've turned those characters into white characters. So, you don't cultivate the opportunity for people to become the next Kevin Spacey, say the Asian Kevin Spacey, because you're changing the Asian roles to white roles.
I understand. I understand why. And it was really all about money. When it comes right down to it, it was all about money. Who was more bankable? This kid who's an up and coming actor, who's a very good actor himself. I can't remember his name. But he was in the Beatles movie. Very tall, very handsome, very good looking kid, a good actor. And I understood that the producers like, well, look, we can't find an Asian actor to play that part, and I just said bullshit. They're like I can see like 3 or 4 of them that could be perfect. I mean, that kid John Cho, he'd been perfect. Why not? Why couldn't he? It's like he could do it. No, he's not bankable. Come on, tell me the real story.
Jim Sturgis' biggest claim to fame before 21 was being in Across the Universe. And despite the fact that the movie got a lot of attention, it was a flop. It didn't make a lot of money. It went to maybe number 8 or number 7 on the weekly ratings. You can put a more well-known actor who's Asian American in his place, and the movie wouldn't have done any worse. You could have put John Cho. People would know John Cho more than they know Jim Sturgis. You could put John Cho. You could have put a lot of other people in there. Because I think what the movie proved was that it wasn't so much the stars that made the movie successful. It was a concept. They liked the concept about the blackjack thing and beating Vegas at blackjack. So the fact that they didn't have any big stars in the movie and it still did well proved that you don't have to have big stars in a lot of movies to do well. So why not put Asian Americans in some of these things, especially when the project is based on a real life story that involved Asian Americans.
I don't like the idea of saying, like in Memoirs of a Geisha, where they cast, a Chinese person to play the geisha. It's like, I don't like the idea that, any Asian will work kind of thing. And so that part of it would have bothered me if it was like, we can't find a good Chinese actor, so this, John Cho will work kind of thing.
If I were the casting director in it, and if I had to say so, I would have insisted that the character be Asian, as the real person was Asian. What's wrong with that? If it's a good story, if it's a good movie, it's going to sell no matter who's in it.
People say, well, race didn't really matter. And I said, well, no, race did matter because the writer of the book said the reason why this team could do so well at blackjack was because most of the team was Asian, and it didn't stand out that an Asian American person would win a lot at blackjack. Whereas if a white person won, the people watching the security cameras would go, something's wrong here. Something's sticking out like a sore thumb. So the fact that they were Asian American was germane to the story. And they lost a lot of interesting things going on because they're Asian American by going mostly white.
It wasn't about, we can't find any Asian talent or talented Asian actors or actresses out there. It was really about the minimizing their risk of getting the money returned, their investment returned with a certain rate that they expected, and to minimize that risk would mean that you have to cast people, or to them anyway, to the casting, to the production companies and the movie heads, to them, in order to minimize the risk of loss and increase the risk of return on their investment, would be to cast people who they think are box office hits, are box office stars that are guaranteed people are going to go see. It didn't matter. They would sacrifice the actual background, the actual, the inspiration of the actual people that started it for money.
I think it was the people who had the money who decided, well, look, we can't give it a green light if we don't have that actor in place. We want to use this guy instead. We'll give the green light if we use this guy. And I guess the producer says, okay, we'll do it. We'll tell a lie. Well, this is just a facsimile of the real story. And that's what you have to take it for. And their justification was, well, we did have a couple of Asian co-stars in it. Yeah. So I'd rather have the lead guy being Asian and the two people helping out being white. That would be fine, but in that case, no.
If they had found an actor that I didn't like who was Caucasian, then it would be so easy for me to say anything about it. But when I watched Jim on screen, there were moments that I could see myself in what he was doing and what he was saying. And I don't know if having him be Asian American or Chinese or whatever would necessarily have helped me feel more that way.
What those images are on those screens is really important. Just seeing people working together, living together, dealing with each other, I think it's a critical piece of having the society be more and more accepting and open to all people and all the specialness and uniqueness of each of them.
When the mainstream thought is, they did this study, these young black girls were given dolls of different races, and which is the pretty one, which is not the pretty one, and they always picked up the white dolls as the pretty doll, and then the black dolls they felt were ugly. They're 5 years old. They're not even able to really think it through yet. I mean, you get to actually see more transparently the level at which this goes in, this information. No one ever told them that this doll was pretty and this doll was ugly. It's sort of like it's in the air they were breathing. That just by everything they watch, who gets picked, who doesn't, what's on screen, what's not, what's considered pretty, like the model image, the most popular model image, all women are somewhere in there. It gets fed in, even if you don't believe in this stuff, it gets fed into the self-esteem because it goes underneath cognition.
Let's say if you're a person who's on the bubble, you're in a situation, you're a young person where it could go either way, what you end up doing with your life. And if every image that you see is negative, then that's going to take away, it doesn't have to. I mean, there are people who press on and somehow have it in them no matter what. But I think most people, regardless, it helps them to have encouraging, positive, little breadcrumbs that can lead them towards, other possibilities. But if that's gone and everything that you see is the same old, then it doesn't really encourage people to really be themselves and explore who that really is.
Perpetual negative one-sided images of a people affects that community. And we've got a lot of work to do to unhinge that. My auntie, a few years ago, she looked back on her life and she said, I always dated white men. And she thought about why, and she said, well, when I grew up reading books, it was always the white prince or the guy on the white horse, and the hero was always white.
We all have ideas and so on that have gotten into our unconscious without us consciously choosing them. And it's sort of like the fish can't see the water. It's everywhere type of thing. We all have that. And some of us try to examine that. Some of us feel, I know for myself, I feel very uncomfortable if I think and believe things that I didn't put in my own head. If I haven't examined my own thoughts. I mean, I have a pretty critically oriented mind. I like to think through things and so on, but not everybody even enjoys that. And so, yeah, it's like if we see something 100 times and we see nothing in contrast to it, it becomes our idea.
My friends, like all my friends who are Asian, Indian, they're like, you're not black. They always tell me you're not black. I'm like, why? They're like, because you get good grades. Like, what are you talking about? I'm black. And they say I'm black because I have a nice house. I'm black. I'm still black, you know? They just don't believe me. They don't think I'm black. Even my black friends sometimes think I'm not black. Like, even right now, how I'm taking classes at college, they're like, why are you doing that, you know? They're like, no, you're not black.
It's so interesting with the race stuff, because it's, when you talk about it, it's hard not to, not to get mad at the world for being so racist. But I mean, that's the way it is. I'm racist, so I gotta get mad at myself. I'm not gonna do that. But it's interesting, when you try and break down, because what you're really trying to do is show people, and if certain people don't want to see people, then it's completely entangled in race issues then. And that's a hard thing to overcome.
Children now did a study about how these images affect children. And what they came out was with when children don't see people of their own race succeeding at their task, it really discourages their own dreams, and so if an Asian child keeps seeing Asian men being beaten up and la 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 la, not that they should succeed at crime, but if we're heroes that succeed at what we want to do, that is so much more uplifting for the Asian child to see that, because the subliminal message that they get is that you can shoot for your dreams, you can make it. But if every single time you see yourself on screen and you're getting beaten down or beaten up, or you're a victim, and you're like some illegal immigrant who's being exploited by someone who brought you over, this kind of real down stuff, then you're going to curtail your own dreams.
There is always some report about discrimination and the impact, and I think people don't care. I think they don't actually see how it works. And I think about my friend Tony, who I was taking care of when he was dying of AIDS, who ended up going to New York and dying in a pediatrics ward. If he had not been an African-American dark-skinned guy, would he have ended up in a pediatrics ward to die? Or my friend Ralph, who was murdered, he's from Haiti, so he's also black, dark-skinned, who went out on a porch and was shot in the back by someone who went by. Not only was he shot in the back, they never found who shot him, and now was there dedication to finding who shot him? What was that based on? Or even the fact, like, someone thought, black guy on a porch. Did they think gang member automatically? What did they think when they shot him? I mean, these impact personal lives.
We all have the capacity to learn. We've all learned things in our lives, and the only time we can learn is when there's what they call neuroplasticity, and that's when the brain is in a certain state where it can learn. For instance, when people are learning languages, they found that people learn a new language much better when they're relaxed, when they're made to feel good about their learning, and the learning really shuts down when they're being criticized about how they're learning. They really won't be very good at it. And so we need neuroplasticity to learn new things. So, and that takes a conscious intention from the inside as well. We have to want to learn, because we could be calm, but if we're not actually that interested in learning in that moment, not even checking if we're interested in learning, we're not going to learn. It's pretty much guaranteed because we don't have to. And so that's why sometimes arguments about race or some kind of oppression don't get very far, because all they do is entrench the positions more. They don't tend to be something that opens up neuroplasticity. And so the oppressor will feel attacked, and will actually there'll be fear there because they're feeling attacked, so they get defensive, and the learning shuts down. In fact, they might learn to say things on the outside that sound good, but their internal experience is sort of retreating, withdrawing, and protecting itself. And they are from then on going to maybe say things that are more politically correct, but internally they're not going to actually open up, metaphorically, their house. They're not going to necessarily open up to share power, to share in any kind of equitable way.
The fact background for Lyle is that she was a writer's assistant on the Friends TV show. She was an African-American woman who had worked in the entertainment industry before. She had worked on Nickelodeon, she had worked on comedy shows, and she was pretty savvy about what it looked like, what comedy looked like, what the entertainment industry looked like. But nothing prepared her for what she experienced on the Friends TV show. She would be in the comedy writer's room taking notes, or sometimes being told not to take notes, while the writers engaged in really outrageous, offensive behavior, both against women and against African Americans.
In the course of doing her job, she was exposed to a litany of kind of antics that one can only be described as kind of frat boy type humor. I mean, the writers were talking about their own sex lives. They were talking about the cast, about how Courtney Cox's vagina was dried up, about how they can nail Jennifer Aniston, about like anything you can think of. And this really had nothing to do with the production of the show.
As the writer's assistant, she was required to write down everything that was said, including things that she found very offensive and things that were very graphic. And the question was whether the California statute that bans sexual harassment applies to a television production process like Friends. And I wrote a brief in that case on her behalf, arguing that the law should apply and that the conduct in the actual case exceeded what was necessary to write the show. The studio argued that this is a show about sex, it's a sex comedy, and so we have to talk about sex in the writer's room.
We were very concerned that the arguments being made on the other side were really going to eviscerate harassment law by carving out an exception for certain workplaces. In that case, creative workplaces wanted to be essentially exempted from many parts of sexual harassment law, and by extension, to racial harassment law.
But the telling piece of evidence in the case was when they would go off on these rants and these tangents and like their sexcapades, they would tell Ms. Lyle specifically, don't write any of this stuff down. Like, now turn it off. You have to be here, but this isn't part of your writer's assistant job. And so the case was based, at least the harassment elements of the case, were based upon the compelled nature of her exposure to rampant sexism.
There seems to be an idea that if you're writing comedy, you shouldn't have any restrictions on what you can say and what you can do to other people that you're working with. And because it's already been a bastion of mostly young white men, the idea that that cultural standard for the comedy writer's room should just persist until the end of time, because that's worked for young white straight men, just to me is outrageous. If you want to open the doors to all facets of employment, sometimes cultures have to change, and I cannot believe that you can't be funny or can't write comedy without being sexist or racist.
The fear is that that sort of environment deters women from applying to take those jobs because they know they're going to have to hear this sort of misogynistic banter every day at work and sort of tolerate that. And I think that's part of the reason why the numbers are so low. If you look at the numbers of writers, less than a quarter, based on the most recent study that I've seen, are female. So there are a lot of barriers to entry, and part of the problem is this misogynistic banter that's permitted and is authorized, they claim, based on artistic freedom.
The guilds need to be much more proactive. I think all of the guilds give lip service to equal opportunity and diversity, and I think the networks do, but I don't really see anybody demanding it, right? The fact that you can have the writers striking over new media, shows a renewed kind of militancy and commitment that's good to see, but they should have been striking over civil rights a long time ago. I mean, they need to demand equal opportunity, and part of the problem is that they're the problem.
If we tell them to shut down a picture or to take it off the air, then we're taking a bunch of our own performers off a project. We will protest, like on Miss Saigon. There was a protest that Screen Actors Guild was very reluctant to get involved in, but we wanted to make sure that Asians were auditioned for roles. Because if we picket or go against some film or some TV series, then we're going against our members also, who are not involved in that conflict.
One of the other difficulties in this entire case was the way that all the courts seemed to disaggregate her evidence. So she is an African American woman. There was evidence of racism, there was evidence of sexism, and there was evidence of sexualized racism and racialized sexism. Yet the court wanted to put all of those pieces of evidence into different piles and analyze them differently, even though there's clear law out there that says that you can't disaggregate that experience and that you need to look at her case from the perspective of a reasonable African American woman, which is who she was. And so the California Supreme Court, for example, in one of the worst or one of the most clear examples of racialized sexism, there was evidence that one of the writers told Ms. Lyle a joke that involved an African American woman and a tampon, and looked her in the eye when he told her this joke. So it seemed that it was directed at her, that it was racial, that it was sexual, and that it was that particular combination of racialized sexism. But what the California Supreme Court found was, well, we don't know very much about the content of that joke, therefore we can't really say that that was a sexist joke, or we can't really say that was a racist joke. So what they did is they parsed her evidence very closely, and they parsed everything sort of in small increments, and they didn't really look at the totality of what she alleged, and they found a lot of different procedural ways to say that she hadn't properly presented her evidence.
I never had any direct contact with Ms. Lyle, so I've been told that she was in the military and that she was stationed overseas at the time the Lyle decision came down. What happened to her, I really don't know.
I heard that she went into the military. So I think she sort of abandoned the entertainment industry altogether, and that may have been a realistic choice because once you complain, once you object, you're sort of blacklisted in the industry. So that's one of the problems here, that there's a lot of discrimination that's happening, but people know that if you object, if you buck the system, then people turn against you and you won't work again. And so it's institutionalized retaliation, which prevents any sort of legal inquiry into this practice of discrimination.
I never met her personally, but I really admire her courage in coming forward and taking on a very popular TV show, trying to sort of lift the curtain on some really outrageous behavior that my understanding is continues to go on.
Who knows why there seems to be an underrepresented, doesn't seem, there is an underrepresentation of women and minorities amongst writing staffs. And, one could surmise that this type of offensive environment is one of the root factors. I mean, that's when the U.S. Supreme Court recognized the doctrine of sexual harassment. They were talking about how women shouldn't have to run the gauntlet of abuse in order to maintain their jobs. How this type of abusive environment really erects barriers to civil rights and equal opportunity. And if the condition of employment is you need to hear, misogynistic comments, maybe women don't want to be part of that environment, and they're not. And maybe that reflects a view of men of women as nothing but sexual playthings, that women couldn't be equals in creating humor, that keep women out of the writer's room.
It wasn't ever said to me, but I know when the Nash Bridges show was here shooting for 6 years, whatever, enough to get into syndication, women on the staff reportedly had to sign an agreement that they would not ever sue for, sexual harassment. And I heard some of the stories that came in from people, and they would not go to the unions, they would not complain, and they had signed an agreement that they wouldn't sue. So that wasn't that long ago. Disgusting.
The idea that you can ahead of time waive your legal rights with respect to sexual harassment or sex discrimination or pregnancy discrimination, it just would not hold up in the law. You cannot prospectively waive your right to be free from discrimination and harassment. But this idea that you could warn someone ahead of time, this is going to be a sexually explicit show, and are you really sure you want to come and work here? Seems to be, unfortunately, what the California Supreme Court suggested might be okay with respect to the Lyle case. So I think it's completely outrageous to suggest that women wouldn't be welcome in these particular environments unless they agree to put up with behavior that's clearly contemplated in advance would be harassing. I mean, it shows that people are well aware that this is not socially acceptable, that this is not okay. So instead of addressing the behavior and saying, we're not going to engage in this kind of behavior, it's important to us to have women as equal partners and to treat women with respect and to treat all of our workers with respect. The idea that you would have ahead of time say, you know what, you may not want to come and work here because we're not willing to change our culture to really, enforce equality, I think is just absolutely wrong, and I can't believe it would survive a legal challenge.
I know how they should come out, but how they actually come out is anybody's guess. The writers are finding that out now with the age claims. There's the Alsh case, and in some cases consolidated with that, brought by older writers in Hollywood who don't get to work on sitcoms. I mean, I'm in my mid-40s. My friends now who have yet to create shows or running shows are feeling like they are at the end of their career laps. You're either up or you're out, and you only have a few more years. And they're in their early 40s, and yet they recognize that their careers are as dead as like a professional athlete who loses his fastball or loses their jump shot once you hit your late 30s. And there's no reason why television writing should have that type of career arc. But there's such a bent towards youth. And the youthful Ivy Leaguers are the prototype of the television writing staff today. And that's typically not, and it's usually the boys. It's not the women, it's not the older workers, it's not the minorities. I can't explain it.
If the company is a major government contractor, there are requirements by the government to make sure that there is equality in employment and there's diversity in the workforce. But how sad is it that you need the government to require something that should be fundamental?
I have been an actor for, how old am I? 37. I've been an actor for about 15 years. I used to get sent out for either young mom. As I've gotten older, also I've been sent out for somebody's wife. Mostly, I have an agent that specifically is a Latino agent. So if they're looking for a Latino, I go into the casting and it's the same ladies that I see every time I go. So we all kind of look alike. We're all kind of short. We all have this mother look. Our hair's almost exactly the same. We all have the same look that, and we go out for all the same stuff.
But there was a time when I used to go to auditions a lot, and if there was an audition for a doctor, let's say, well, the talent agency would send all the white males who might look like a doctor, whatever that means. Well, there aren't doctors who are females. There aren't doctors who are Indian. There aren't doctors who are African.
Visual media, meaning film, and TV and commercials, we want to make assessments about characters like that. Oh, you're married, you're middle-aged, you got, you work 9 to 5, you do this or whatever. Oh, you're a housewife, blah, 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 you're this. Oh, you're off the grid. You're like, a caveman, or whatever, So that, 30 seconds, we know who and what you are, And it's like, so there's that tendency. And I don't think that I necessarily fall into that. At least that's my opinion of me, is that, you don't, a 30-second assessment of me, and it's like, what the fuck, man, where are you at?
When I came out here, my nickname was Mimi, and I had been married to a man whose last name was Vieaux, V-I-E-A-U-X. And it sounded like Mimi Vieaux, that's the way it was pronounced, but it was too close to Yvette Mimieux. And they said, you're going to be cast in Oriental roles, so you should have an Oriental name. Now this is how dumb I was. I came out here thinking that I would be playing American roles. I could just go audition for the secretary, the nurse, the doctor, whatever, because I grew up in Arvada, Colorado, when I was not put in boxes like that. And for a number of years, most of what I did was speaking in Japanese. And I'd have to hire a coach every time I did a role.
My theater training started as an actor, and when I finished my undergrad studies and was thinking about graduate theater studies, my first desire was to go to acting school. And in the process of auditioning for MFA programs, the feedback that I got, now this is 15 years ago, the feedback that I got was I would be boxed into this minority woman with an accent. So because of my looks and because of my accent, that I would never be cast in a lead part. I was actually told that in the audition process, and that I would always be cast in small parts that are specific to someone from the Middle East or some unidentifiable foreign country.
The very first audition I had, before I was with an agency even, I got the direction to do something more street, more urban, and I was like, huh? I didn't really know what he meant, and I was hoping I didn't know. I think I knew. And then it was for a popular shoe company. and I had chosen, it was a voiceover thing, and it was like I was a young basketball player, so I was like, oh, okay, I'll be a women's basketball team, I'll be proud, And he was like, yeah, just do it like that again, but just more street, more urban. And I was like, no, you gotta be kidding me. And I called my dad, and I was really upset.
I'm playing the wife in this situation where the husband is kind of having a meltdown, and she's trying to help him and support him and get him together for this big opportunity. And I felt like I was really hitting all those beats and all the intentions and everything of what I would be doing as someone. This is someone that I care about, but I also am trying to say, really pull it together, come on. And but the director was saying, don't be so harsh, don't be so bossy, don't be so, and I'm like, and I really was not, I was being a fabulous wife in the situation, but he didn't see me. He was on automatic pilot. And I can say this with authority, because he did say that at a certain point where he kept telling me over and over, just don't be so bossy. He's not even looking at me. Don't be such a ball buster or whatever. And so, but this is the stereotype that he had in his mind about black women being mean and bossy. And so when he finally sat down, we ran the scene, because I'm totally confused by these directions that he's giving me, and I'm just getting softer and softer and meeker until finally he was like, what are you doing? Kick his butt, and I'm like, you just told me not to be, that's the only thing you've been saying to me, like every time we've run this scene. And he's like, oh, well, that's what I have to say to my black actresses, and I was like, what?
I'm doing this show where none of the, it's an ensemble of 4. None of the actors, none of the characters are given names. We all just have the role. So my role is actually of a professional, an executive. She is specifically supposed to be African American. There are 4 other characters: an Earth Mother, Iowa housewife, and soap star. No one has a name. These are the 4 characters. I was directed to play Power Woman. I start out as a Condoleezza Rice type, and I end as a Tina Turner type. Now the show is called Menopause the Musical. It's about menopause, and there are parodies of songs, and the book is actually very thin, so the storyline is thin. It's mostly about the songs and all that sort of thing. So I'm like, great, I love that idea. That's totally fun. So there are many things about that experience that are troubling. It started in rehearsal when there was a meeting with the African American women who were going to be playing Power Women, and we were instructed as to how black women act when they're alone and comfortable. I guess and at the time I was thinking, well, I guess to be loose for the Tina Turner time, right, or something like that. But really it was like, there's no connection other than, okay, this production team, fully racist. The producer, Jeannie Linders, the director, Catherine Conte, sitting there telling us how black women are, telling us black women how black women actually are. And then at some point we go to see the show in Orlando, which is where the original cast was, and we get to see the original, most of the original cast in this particular performance. And the original Power Woman was performing, and there's supposed to be this character arc. I had been really, I'm diligent with my notes. Condoleezza Rice to Tina Turner. And I didn't see that arc. She seemed to have, to me, 1 note. Although I liked her, she had 1 note. I asked the director because I said, I want to make sure I'm doing the role right. And she's the one who originated the role. So my assumption is that she's doing it the way they want it done. Is this how you want it done? And I said, because I didn't really see the character arc that we were talking about. The director grabs my arm and she says, she's the whitest in all our productions. Don't look to her for that.
If you had just drawn a character that's Condoleezza Rice without knowing that there is a real Condoleezza Rice with these qualities, you'd go, oh, there'd be people who would be like, that's not realistic, but it is realistic because it's real and true.
Kathleen Antonia was a character in this musical that was playing a Condoleezza Rice type character, and was continually instructed that she needed to be blacker. The director tried to make her more stereotypical, and when she objected to some of that direction, ultimately they fired her.
The character that played Iowa housewife, I never heard any of the actors. I lived in Iowa as a little kid, and I grew up a lot in the Midwest. None of them sounded like they were from Iowa. I never once heard anyone direct them to sound like they were from Iowa. This is Iowa housewife. Iowa is in her character's name, and yet the black character is supposed to sound like she's from a ghetto somewhere and has clawed her way up to Wall Street or whatever it is. And I'm like, this is not Condi Rice.
I've worked with Kathleen before on a couple of occasions. She came in and replaced me when I was pregnant and needed to come off the road, and she came in and replaced me in a show where I was playing Condoleezza Rice and an ambassador, and that was great. And then I got to direct her in a new work where again she was playing Condoleezza Rice, and I thought she did a fine job. And here's an example: Condoleezza Rice, undeniably a black woman, but she's not sassy and neck rolling.
3 days after Rosa Parks dies, the director Catherine Conte tells me I need to be blacker.
Let's say an African American actor has been cast in a role and then is asked by the director, who's probably white, probably a white male, to talk more black, whatever that meant. That's sort of a telling comment, talk more black. Not talk more African American, talk more black. Wow. Dumb down, that's what it's saying. Dumb down the role so that you're believable as a person who is at the low end of our societal structure, regardless of your training, your education, your intelligence, the beauty of the culture that you represent. Because for that ignorant director, all he is doing is referencing other images that he has seen on the screen. He's not referencing humans that he's seen in real life.
You're saying that to a black person who's been black all their life, so they actually get to be the expert on what blackness is.
If someone gave me that instruction, I would feel uncomfortable. Like, let me tell you what it is to be black. What I would want to do is use that discomfort of mine to go, wait a minute, I need to take this apart. What does that mean? What is it that's missing here? I want you to be a little louder. I want whatever this stereotype is that she's trying to promote. If I really think about black people I know all kinds, so I don't get the instruction. It's sort of like if I'm told to be whiter, it's like, well, which one, But the media is such a limited collection of images of minority races, By minority, I mean less power-holding races. And so that's what they go to, that palette, which is very small, very small.
With women from the Middle East, it's like the most offensive, the most painful stereotypes exist, I think, that we're oppressed, that we don't speak up, that we have no rights, that we, now this is women in the Middle East. And then, women from the Middle East come here and they find freedom and opportunities and all that. Now, it's not to say that doesn't happen. It does happen, but that's not the only scenario. And this whole other conversation about veil and veiling and, Muslim women veiling, and it's just there's all this sort of, exotic notions of all, the hidden and stuff that's not permitted, that is really kind of more a reflection of the European notions of the Middle East, and romanticizing goes back to sort of 19th century that we haven't really sort of gotten over yet.
I was wearing a necklace and it had a cross on it, and I was this stage reading, and this man said to me, "Oh, you added that cross? Oh, that's real Mexican." I was like, "Wow, yeah, I'm Mexican," but I think that other people wear crosses too in their life.
I still get comments like, "Boy, you speak well," or "You speak English very well." Or actually, they'll say, "You speak English good." And then I have to correct them and go, "No, I speak English well, because I got an A in grammar, gosh darn it. I was raised here. I took honors English. Why wouldn't anybody ask Mike Tyson where he's from? He doesn't speak English well. He doesn't speak English good.
If you have folks who know nothing about the culture of these African Americans or Asian Americans or whatever, but they know some stereotypes of the sort that they have seen in other movies. It's all referential to other movies, not to reality. They say, oh, well, we need you to talk in a certain way. Oh, yeah, I thought it'd be really cool if this guy was like, a drug addict and he liked music. That would be really cool. I mean, that's what blacks are like, right? It's horrifying. I'm sure it's horrifying for the people doing it, as well as the people that have to do those things to make a living, as well as for the people from those communities who have to see that and say that's what they think our life is like.
As long as you're trying to just make people, here are the boxes, there's 4 boxes, and if you don't fit in the box, then you don't get to play. And so you want to come do this, get in the box. That's where that happens, where in rehearsal, when you get a direction like be more black, they're telling you to get in the box. And it's like, you know what? I'm not getting in the box. It's too small.
I wrote to the union and said I haven't yet been written up for being white or for not being black enough. Like, this hasn't come down in like some performance warning, and there's no written anything about it. I'm just telling you that this happened. The next day, the stage manager's rehearsal report says more ethnicity. So now I'm like, well, now it's been written down, and I'm beyond pissed, because I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm supposed to be more ethnic in a role that's supposed to be Condoleezza Rice to Tina Turner. Because one of Condoleezza Rice's first lines ends with her saying, girlfriend. Yeah, Condi Rice. I always hear her say girlfriend. And I can imagine when she's at home and she's just kicking it with GW or something. She's like, girlfriend. Yeah, this is who I think Condi Rice is. We all think this.
Actors are employees who are entitled to the protections of both Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and to the Fair Employment and Housing Act. So they're not in a category unto themselves where they're not protected.
Title VII, which is the federal statute that bans discrimination, has a special exception for certain jobs where it's necessary for someone to be a particular sex. That does not apply to race at all, though. So that's one interesting thing, that there is a broader exception for some sex-based discrimination, but there is no exception for race. However, even with respect to sex, it's a very narrow exception. You have to show a tight connection between the sex of the applicant and the job restriction. So for instance, in a Supreme Court case involving prison guards, where you had an all-male prison, they said it would be dangerous to allow women to be prison guards because they'd be vulnerable to sexual assault. So that was a distinction that the court said counted as a BFOQ. However, most courts have rejected arguments about a BFOQ. For instance, Southwest Airlines once argued that flight attendants had to be female because they wanted to have sexy stewardesses. And the court said, no, that's not a valid reason, and rejected that argument.
You can't have a law firm where you only hire white males because your argument is that juries respond better to white males. They think that they have better authority. All of these things may be true. You still cannot hire only attorneys who are white and male. You could paint your walls in your law firm a certain palette and say, well, because of the palette, I only want people working here who are very fair-skinned, because dark skin will counter the wonderful cream color I have on the wall or something like that. That is an artistic choice, but it has nothing to do with hiring lawyers, with running a law firm, no matter what creative arguments you make about the color of your walls.
In fact, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has said that the BFOQ defense has to be narrowly construed, and that customer preference or stereotypical ideas about who should do what types of jobs are not going to be acceptable.
When someone is part of the mainstream, in other words, it's like being part of the mainstream in your thinking and belief system means, and social groups, means it's that thing where you drive in the parking lot, these parking lots that have the spikes up, that if you drive out of the parking lot, the spikes lay down. So it's all very smooth. But if you try to go the other way on the spikes, it'll puncture your tires. So when you're in the mainstream, in the dominant part, a part of the dominant culture, you won't even know that you're ignorant. It's not possible, because everything kind of gets smooth. And there are so many people to support your point of view when you're part of the mainstream. And so it's really only the moments when there's some kind of conflict or something that you have an opportunity to wake up and go, hey, maybe there's more to this than I thought. And for people that don't like to be uncomfortable, they're going to reduce the opportunity of that even occurring, like exposing themselves to things. And this is how ignorance just stays ignorant a lot. And when I say mainstream, that's ignorance with power. So it gets to make the decisions for other people that don't have the same power or same way of thinking.
The day before Thanksgiving, I'm fired. Because apparently what triggered the whole firing at that particular moment was because I'd put up the rules in the Actors Equity Association rule book about employment discrimination, or about discrimination and equal opportunity, and I'd put these around my mirror. I had a bunch of stuff over there, but I put them around my dressing area, and the director, Catherine Conte, saw them. Why she was at my dressing table, I don't know. She saw them, took a picture, sent them to the producer, Jeannie Linders, who then, 3 days later, fired me. Seems to me an open shut case of race discrimination and retaliation. Most clearly retaliation.
It went to an arbitrator for a decision, and that he ruled in favor of the producers and found that there was not discrimination. And after having read the materials, my view was that the reasoning of the arbitrator was not sound, that he overlooked many instances of discrimination and seemed very deferential to sort of protecting the status quo in the industry. I think that that's a huge problem here, that there's no guarantee, even if actors do challenge the status quo, that courts will be sensitive and recognize it. This is linked to a broader problem in Title VII jurisprudence. Many courts are dismissive of Title VII cases brought by people of color and women in sort of a standard garden variety context, like an office, a teacher. Just think about any sort of job. It's very hard to win these cases, especially race cases, no matter who you are. When you add in the entertainment industry in the context of artistic freedom, it gets even more complicated. So there are a lot of forces that reinforce the status quo and make it hard for people to even see this as an issue of discrimination that requires redress.
The courts seem to be very, very reluctant to actually apply the BFOQ doctrine. And BFOQ stands for Bona Fide Occupational Qualification. And it's supposed to be the doctrine that comes into play when an employer objectively makes a business decision based upon a protected class. Whether it's, we only want to have Chinese waiters in a Chinese restaurant, or we need to cast a white person as Abraham Lincoln in a drama about the Civil War. And to show a BFOQ, you really need to show that it's a necessity to have this race-based distinction. It's a very, very high threshold that's very, very difficult to achieve.
Say you're doing Abraham Lincoln, so you want a white male. I think that's okay. Or if you're doing a show about menopause and you want women over 40, or you want no men in it. I mean, this is also, I think, a bona fide casting choice. If Menopause the Musical, if the producers had decided that I was too young and just not compelling their audiences in that way, then I would have been upset because I wanted to work. But it would also have been like, okay, that's legitimate. That's a bona fide reason. You're doing a show about menopause. It's bona fide to want people who actually are over 40 or who appear to be menopausal. Okay.
If you wanted to tell a story about a particular ethnic community, imagine the Joy Luck Club, right? That makes sense to say we're going to prefer actors that are of a particular ethnicity. However, many stories that we see aren't based in a particular community that is monoracial. Most societies, there's a mix of people in most communities, so that you can have a casting that reflects a variety of different races and men and women. And so to me, the question is, what is the storyline? Is there a strong theme in the storyline that requires us to take race or sex into account. But there are many instances where there really is no justification. So, for example, Salma Hayek has stated in an article that her manager was told that she couldn't apply for a role as an alien in outer space. And the justification was there are no Latinas in outer space.
People don't seem to want to challenge their ignorance very much. First of all, we rarely know it, right? I don't know my own. I mean, we all have areas that we're ignorant or unknowing in. I don't know my areas of ignorance myself until I bump into something, right? That's how I find out about it, because it's like a big invisible ball I carry on me. And then when I hit something, then I feel the ball. And so that's the moment, actually, when those moments are not usually pleasant for any of us, right? But that's a moment where you can shut down, or you can open up and go, oh, I didn't realize I didn't know something here. Let me at least listen.
I think that there's still this tremendous amount of racism in the entertainment industry. There's tremendous amount of sexism, of homophobia. It's unfortunately reflecting the society that we live in. And I know that we hear a lot about the struggles of African American actors in Hollywood and being pigeonholed into certain types of roles or into expecting to act a certain way.
I can remember my parents and older brothers and sisters talking about these kinds of issues around the kitchen table when I was, 4 or 5 years old, 35 years ago. And I don't know that I think that it's changed that much. I mean, as I said, in popular culture, there are definitely very many more depictions of people of color in film, in television. But more importantly, if you look at the types of people that they get to play, the spectrum of roles, it's still so narrow. I think that's a problem. And so often, the characters that they're playing are not written by people of color. So that informs the product, the role, the dialogue. So you have white people writing and producing Black stories, and I don't mean just stories by Black people, but the stories of Black people's lives. And then that becomes, for the wider culture, so the icon of what Black people are. So it's white people telling white people who Black people are, and it's it's one of those special things about being in America.
I know of directors who have had the same thing, like who would get cast for like a telenovela type of thing, and then they say, you know what, we want a Latino, or I think you get a lot with kind of the so-called black comedies on what used to be the UPN and now the CW. Like, if you look at their staffs, somehow or other somebody makes a decision that only Black people can write for Black people, and you'll use those to beef up your overall demographics of how many African Americans are working in the industry, but they're all on those same shows. And because it does reflect a bias that you need to be of that race to understand the product. I mean, I don't get it, but there's I think an awful lot of that, even by the people who consider themselves liberal.
Stereotypes are so vicious, and they supersaturate the world. So Black people can have the same stereotypes about Black people that white people have. It isn't the case that they always think differently. So I'm down in LA, and I'm auditioning. Everyone in the room is Black. What is wrong with you? Mike Epps, he stands up and he says, well, could you do something a little more? And you see the head start and you know where it's going. So he gives me a scenario. Because I said, what do you mean? He gives me a scenario. I'm Michelle Obama. Now, mind you, this is at the beginning of the campaign, the presidential campaign. Not much is known about Michelle Obama. he didn't even say Michelle Obama. He says Obama's wife. And I said, you mean Michelle? Because he didn't even know her name. And I was like, I don't really know much about Michelle Obama. Like, I don't know her well enough to mimic mannerisms or anything. Like, I don't know Michelle Obama. I don't. Now I know her a little better. I think she's kind of a Mary Tyler Moore who could dunk on you or something. And so I sort of think if I'd been given Michelle Obama now, I'd have something to come up with, some Mary Richards, sporting type. But at the time, I didn't know Michelle Obama. And when I say I don't know Michelle Obama, he says, that's okay. This is the scene. So Barack is coming home from the Hill, and he's late. You've been making dinner and taking care of the kids, so you're a little irritated with him. Okay. Go back and forth between being presidential wife and ghetto bitch. And in my soul, I just dropped. I just thought, what the fuck is wrong with you?
It's hard to be degraded, even if it's the little stuff. Like, okay, you're at rehearsal, and some people just don't even know how to be around people of color. You just get tired. You get tired mentally. Your heart gets tired, and you think back of why you're doing this craft, and the depth of that craft, and you just get tired of it. And I feel like that's really sad. I feel like also, what happened to me was I had to just take a step back and find out where I wanted to work, because I felt like I was just too tired to do both things. So now I work less and try to pick and choose my projects. But then what happens, because I'm an actor, is that I miss my craft. So you're caught between this thing, like, should I do that? But I know what's going to happen. I'm going to get fed up and I'm going to get tired of it. And there's also, for me anyway, some kind of rage attached to oppression in general, and then in general in the world, and that kind of comes into play also for me.
One of my running jokes is, oh God, I miss the 90s. Remember the 90s, because the economy was doing better. My career was certainly, you would get those phone calls every once in a while in the 90s where they said yes, or they just seemed to be more magic and possibility then. And so I started charting my ups and downs, and I really feel like the Bush years did me in. I don't know if it's a coincidence or if it has to do with these economic policies or the mood of the country, but there was a big shift. I directed a short film recently, and I played in a few festivals with a number of other short films, and I was surprised at how many of them were from Canada. And they were really good. And they all had grants. They all had the Canadian Something for the Arts, and helped paid for, and I don't know the whole ins and outs of how they were financed, but they had help from the government, and I was so impressed with that, and also a little jealous. Like, I was proud of myself because I managed somehow. I actually got a grant from HBO to make a short film. I won a contest, which was lucky. So they were my government, I guess.
I really very much admire Tyler Perry because of this. He is the writer, and he's the director, and he's the producer, and he puts his own money in. So there isn't somebody who can come up and say, Tyler, this psychiatrist character, that's not realistic. You got to change her. And if he doesn't change it, then the plug can get pulled, or he can get fired. That's the reason why I really love that scene in Crash. Terrence Howard's character is this director of a TV show, and there's a black character who the actor didn't speak totally in Ebonics. He actually said a line grammatically correctly. And Tony Danza's character comes over to Terrence, and they finish the scene, and everybody's like, "Woo, good work, good take." Tony Danza comes over, pulls him aside, and says, "That's we have to reshoot." And he goes, "Why? Why do we need to reshoot it? It looks good." And he's like, "No, we got to reshoot because he didn't say that line right, And he shows him, and he was like, oh, well, that's okay. That's not, he goes, do we have a problem? Tony Danza says to him, that's it. It's like, you either go and reshoot that scene with him speaking grammatically incorrectly, because that's what I want to put out to the world, that this black guy can't speak English. And if you're not going to do that, you can be replaced. And I thought that was, and it goes by really fast. Probably a lot of people don't even remember it. But it was big to me because that's exactly what we're talking about. That these images get reinforced, and they are violently reinforced in the sense that, your job is at stake. If you don't get that image out there the way I want it, I don't want this young black guy speaking English correctly. Because some people might think they can speak English.
It is so informed by the business people's own idea about what will sell, what should sell, what has sold in the past. And I don't think there's a lot of empirical evidence to either back up their assumptions and the work hasn't been done to test those assumptions. And I think that's a loss for Hollywood as a business.
They'll have you believe that African Americans, unless you're Tyler Perry or Will Smith or Denzel Washington, we don't do well overseas. And a lot of the films get pre-sold. Like someone could pre-sell their film for international distribution, which will give them money to complete their film. So if you don't get sales internationally, pre-sales internationally, or you don't think your project will do well over internationally, it's hard to get people to invest in your film.
Throughout my career, I've worked on a number of sort of gay-themed projects, especially in my fiction and in TV and film type developing things that I'm trying to make happen. And sometimes I wonder if I had just played it straight or wrote really mainstream stuff with the same passion and stuff, if I'd be much farther along.
A writer who wants to win an Oscar, who wants more money for his next script, is going to write accordingly. He's going to write Oscar-winning roles for the actors. Who is he going to write those for, men or women? What's going to bring him the biggest budget? Because now we know it's about budget, it's about audience, about how much the film makes, as opposed to, is it really a beautifully told story? So there's so many levels of where it starts, where it ends, where it has to be goosed a little bit, where infiltration is impossible, where common sense doesn't stand a chance. There's so much hatred that's disguised, and not very subtly, as choice.
In the entertainment industry, they do marketing research, they actually interview audience members when they first want to, you've heard of those films that they change the ending of after the first couple of screenings, right? So there's a little bit of that, but ultimately I think when the only standard of success is money, then and if the studios are making a ton of money, then it's kind of hard to dissuade them.
It is a business. And I think what we need to prove is that using us will bring in dollars. I think we would.
As a community, we can come to general agreements about things that are in good taste or in poor taste, things that are desirable, things that are non-desirable, but I definitely think it's the role of the artist to transgress all of those things anyway, so I couldn't agree with any sort of legal strictures around that sort of thing. And at the same time, I would push for people to make what I think is the right choice about that sort of thing. I think that's a better way to deal with it. And through the example of the work, do great work that is multicultural, that gives people an opportunity to play the range of human experience, and people will like it. I believe that.
I've tried to pitch a reality series. I spent a year following a subject around in San Francisco, and I pitched it to Logo, and I pitched it to Here TV, and I jumped through hoops, and I did a minor cut, trailer, and so nothing. So it's hard, you really have to have the resources to really do that.
These are the projects that mean everything to me, and I have a great passion for them, and they mean a lot to me personally, and the experiences are great. And I like being a voice for, people that may be underrepresented. So I don't personally ever regret any of those decisions. But sometimes professionally, I think, if I had put that same passion into a Kate Hudson romantic comedy spec, would I be would I have more money? Would I be in a little more financially secure place?
The dominant forces in the industry are still forces that I think are not, it's not that they're not sensitive to diversity, but that I feel like people of different ethnicities need to get to positions of power to be the decision makers, and then things will start to change.
I don't know what can change, the status of Hollywood today as far as, predominantly white men, because you have to think about it. A lot of the people who are in the positions they are now, their parents were in those positions, or they grew up in that environment. I mean, we're just kind of new to that. I mean, we didn't, we weren't welcome with open arms, when filmmaking began. Now the studios want to make independent films, so is it really independent film now that the films are, $14 million, even $20 million, now that's the bar now, I think, for what's being called, it's an independent film if it's $20 million. Well, then that, again, that's putting us, again, we're out of reach of even that.
We ourselves can promote our own movies. We can try to create a forum for our own movies, but until it gets national attention or until it gets national play and national distribution, we're not going to be able to create a forum such that money and funding wise, we will be able to sustain our own projects.
So many companies that are culturally identified in one way or another, such as the Negro Theater Ensemble has gone under, and so many of the black identity theaters have gone under, and so many of the teatros, the Hispanic, that mushroomed after Luis Valdez founded Teatro Campesino. Very few of those still survive, and Teatro Campesino still has its own theater, but it doesn't produce all that often. The Asian American Theater in San Francisco, which was one of the 3 major Asian theater companies in the country, is pretty much gone under. Even Traveling Jewish Theater is now in deep and most of the women's identity groups. We still have a couple here. Maybe a lot of those companies have served their purpose, and it doesn't make sense to mourn them, but to notice their passing and to celebrate what they have accomplished and given. Even though one might feel personally sad that company is not here anymore, but I think it's something to treasure and to celebrate, and still you can never forget that it took much too long to happen, and I think we all have to always remember how long it took, how hard it was for so many people, for the Josephine Bakers who had to, go, the great stars whom America didn't get to profit from because it was too stupid.
The fight's not over. I don't know if it ever will be. It's like we scuffle, We're human beings, we're social animals vying for territory. And the ones who don't really care much about territory, because maybe a lot of people don't, they just want to have a nice life and so on. But But people like that are also all in the fight, because not fighting when there's something unjust going on is, you're not helping.
There's a lot of different fronts on which progress needs to be made. And I think of the possibilities of a multiracial coalition in terms of people of color banding together, and women also, because one casting director said that a woman over 40, a white woman over 40, is a minority as well in Hollywood. You see that the opportunities for casting start dropping when a woman nears 40. Well, I think most of us want to see reality. We want to see the whole range of Black people, the whole range of Latinos, Asians, etc.
My suggestion is for anyone, to go out and make, buy a camera, make a film.
I think the solutions are that we have to produce our own works. That people who are independent thinkers, people who are free thinkers, have to be willing to, produce works. I as an artist can't just sit and wait for parts to come my way that don't fit the typical stereotypical line. It's not going to happen. That's not, so I have to be willing to produce my own stuff, or to come together with others who are like-minded and us produce our works.
I think the biggest thing that minorities can try to do to get this to change is by being the guys who make the decisions behind the camera, right? It's like getting more African Americans or Asian Americans to be producers and directors, and to basically take the bull by the horns and do it that way, rather than being on the other side of the camera and complaining.
We do have Asian Americans in pretty powerful positions right now, but yet there has not been a lot of shakeup. If more of us minority actors step up and speak up, things could change a lot faster.
All of the performers unions have the opportunity to adopt language within their collective bargaining agreements that define what discrimination is. And they can say, unless there is a bona fide occupational reason for having someone of a particular race or gender or age or ability, then you cannot discriminate against actors for those reasons.
I really think that the law is an important tool, and we really need to use the law as much as we can. But I also think that the law is only one tool, and we really need to use other tools at our disposal. And certainly consumer choice is very important and powerful, especially with respect to the entertainment industry. The entire industry is based on consumers. It's based on people going to see movies. It's based on people buying television sets. It's based on people watching television and watching commercials. And if people send a strong message about sexism and racism and homophobia in the media, I do think that we'll see some change.
There was a critic here for the Bay Guardian, a woman named Irene Oppenheim. For a couple of years, she did a kind of scorecard at the end of each season of taking all of the major professional, semi-professional ones and saying, okay, there were this many productions, there were this many of the plays were by white males, this many were by women, this many were by African Americans, this many were by Asian Americans, this many were by Latinos. I think those are the categories. And so to do that with the playwrights, with the directors, and with the major roles, right? And that was really fascinating. And I think to have that kind of scorecard, it's very hard to do. And it's a lot of, it's a lot of what they call unpaid overtime. But that was, I think that helped.
People need to be aware of what they're watching and not just mindlessly watch. All these reality shows that you look at, and a lot of them have a lot of people of color on those reality shows, stereotyping and acting crazy. And we have to be able to say, no, like we have to be able to turn it off. There's so much choice. We have to be able to like not watch movies that stereotype us in deep ways, even if it sounds good. You know what I mean? Just because it's wrapped up in a bow, we just have to be conscious of who we are and what we watch in a first way, and then to actually change the channel and not go see movies that degrade us. And then I think instead of people saying that they're diverse, they need to do their work. They need to analyze how they think. And if they're not doing it, then they need to step up their game and do it. If they're not being conscious, they need to do it.
Real thinking, it always will break down power structures. Because I think physiologically, all of us have the capacity and reflex in certain situations to be fair, to be caring, to be empathic, to hurt when we see someone get hurt. You know, during the civil rights movement, I mean, showing what was going on in the South on screen was very important, you know, to evoke an emotional response, right, to you know, that goes beyond words, so that at least a larger body of people could go, this is, you know, could be outraged and say this is wrong. And you need that larger body of people to shift a system, having a different emotional response, not just thinking. I mean, for some of us, a new thought will, you know, give us strong enough emotions. But I think it's more about keep it going, you know, keep it going. And otherwise the whole thing just really encrusts upon itself.
People want to, you know, we live in a sort of a consumerist society, right? So you look at the way food is packaged, the way clothing is packaged, the way movies are packaged, they're all products. And people want to know what they're buying. People want to know what they're getting. They recognize Indiana Jones. They recognize Shrek. It's not an unknown. You know, when you want people to take a chance on an unknown product, then you have to build the market for it. Then you have to develop the need for it.
We have to continue to support work that is non-mainstream, continue to support work by producers and directors of color, continue to support work that features African American, Asian, Latino, the whole spectrum of non-mainstream actors and actresses. And I think that eventually, if we keep doing that, Hollywood will catch on and follow the dollars, because I think that's what it really is about.
I think ultimately the stereotypes that the industry has about minorities in commerce are wrong, and they have to be proven to be wrong, and that will lead the change faster than the legal system can drive that change.
I think we can push for a lot of things and try and reflect that and not be puppets of that kind of stuff. You know. But I don't know. It's, you know, money talks.
If you're a government that supports its artists, whether they're working in Hollywood or whether they're, you know, in the theater or whatever, I think that it makes a stronger country overall. I think it's good for the country's soul. I think it has ramifications that aren't maybe quantifiable in dollars or money at the box office or whatever, but a government that says this matters to us, I think, is a healthier government for artists and for the whole country.
I think the short answer is going to be just a critical mass of people refusing to get into the box. So whatever that means, however they're going to react to that, you know, in terms of communicating more, in terms of offering more alternatives, in terms of, you know, being able to just, if it's just, we're going to be offensive with this and that's the way it is, of being able to say no, of, you know, all these different things.
My own casting process has never really been along racial lines or along gender lines, for that matter. If somebody wanted to see a bus driver, and I knew they were thinking a man, or a school principal, give me a man. I don't necessarily know that all bus drivers are men and all school principals are men. So I'll send the people I think are right for the job that can pull it off. And it always is more intriguing to me and a much bigger win.
People like Dennis Weaver, that goes way back, he's a former president of the Screen Actors Guild, would not go on the set unless there were people of color on his crew. And that's why I think it's so important for all of the guilds, the creative people, to be talking with each other about the issues of diversity.
Anything that we can do to break down barriers, to promote inclusion, to promote the honoring of everybody's specialness is good, is important. I think it's part of what is required of us in the society, because we have contributed as an entertainment industry to the negative stereotypes over many generations. We have at least as much responsibility for correcting the problems that we have created with our work.